He still won. Like, and he's still a premier receiver who put up monster numbers, who has succeeded at Pitt. Pitt goes to the ACC title game. They win the ACC this past year. Kenny Pickett moves on. Mark Whipple, his OC, moves on. But Keaton Slovis, big transfer from USC, he comes over. Pitt, in probably the best place they've been in as a football program in a while. Things are humming all across the board. There's no reason for Jordan Addison, who has succeeded and been one of the best receivers, and Pitt has done right by him because he has developed quite nicely in Pittsburgh. There was rumors that like he was going to enter the portal, and there is a difference between entering the portal and then talking to a player versus talking to a player to get him to enter the portal and get in his ear and be like, hey, no, you're doing pretty well over there, but we can probably put together an NIL deal for you that can just make so much more money for you before you get in the NFL. Those are two separate conversations, and this is not what the intent of NIL was. This was something that people who are not naive expected to eventually come and come fast because there are no guardrails and there are no rules in college football at the moment, that this was going to happen. And Lincoln Riley became villain number one on college football Twitter over the last few days. We don't even know for sure if it was Lincoln who reached out. We don't know. It could be Caleb Williams.
That's what's interesting to me is I've heard multiple teams, and it doesn't even sound like USC is necessarily the favorite. So it is interesting how Lincoln Riley, USC, automatically became the villain, like you're saying.
Right. And it's one of those things where we don't really know who's to blame or why this is happening and who jump-started this process. What we do know is Addison's in the portal now. We do know that his Pitt career is likely over. We do know that Keaton Slovis tweeted about this week and was pretty upset about Addison and what's going on here.
Why the hell do you think I came to Pittsburgh, bro?
Right. But it's also like, okay, this is a complicated conversation to have, but it's an important one because I think this is the kind of thing, this is the doomsday scenario for the have-nots, I guess is how we should frame it. This is a doomsday scenario where these schools who do the right things and have these stars now have to worry about getting picked off by the haves. And you saw that with Georgia Tech, where it's like our only cool player, Jahmyr Gibbs, gone. And he's going to tear it up at Alabama next year. And the fear with NIL and the fear with no guardrails and no protections is that these guys who develop at these schools that are not the creme de la creme and do not have the boosters, do not have the money that these other programs like a USC or a Miami or a Texas or a Oklahoma or whoever, a Georgia, Bama, that they just, what are they supposed to do? And that's how you lose a bunch of fans. This is how you piss off a bunch of people. Is that was something that made college football great, was that the talent was spread out and that you could go to Pitt and win a Heisman. Like you could be a Larry Fitzgerald at Pittsburgh and it'd just be awesome. You could LaShawn McCoy.
Should have won the Heisman.
Right, but that's the whole thing. He was in the conversation and it was fine. Pitt never had to worry about Larry leaving at the end of it. That was not on their radar. Now you're worried if you develop someone, if you're a have-not, that people can just tamper. And there's no way to prove it. Like we have no idea what's going on with Jordan Addison. Like you'll never get a straight story on how this started, where it goes, any of that. We just know that if you're a Pitt fan, you have every right to be extremely pissed off about the state of affairs of college football right now. Because they're just, what's the term? They're just kind of like what is it called? The inexperience. It's the control. They're the control. Where it's like, we're about to see what happens, and this is step one. And I imagine Pat Narduzzi is quite pissed off about this situation. And I think most group of five coaches, most have-not schools are going to be extremely pissed off about this because Addison will not be the last one, because I don't think this is getting cleared up anytime soon. There's no way to legislate this out of college football once you open the floodgates. So when you unleash the floodgates and this happens, man, like this is such a bad look all across the board. And whoever lands Jordan Addison, we're all gonna be like, ugh, like kind of gross. Like,
yeah,
we
how
don't
much
like
did you
this
pay for him?
Exactly, and that's the pay for play aspect. It was not the intent of NIL. but that's where we're at. It's now free agency where you don't even enter the portal yet. We can just go to you on any team and we can poach you. That's breaking a code where it's like, you would think that these coaches would be like, this coaching brotherhood would be like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to, like, if they're not in the portal, they're off limits. Nobody can talk to them. Talk to your team. Don't talk to these guys. Whatever. But that's not what happened. And now Jordan Addison's in the portal, and Pitt season's now we have to look at it completely differently. Like, you lose your best player and you change everything. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but this is where we're at. Is that a fair way of characterizing what's going on right now?
I mean, I think that's how everybody feels, because it's like, I can't remember the guy's name that used to be on 92.9. Rick Kamla is on NBA Network. He would always say, I feel like the way he would always phrase himself is like, this makes me feel some kind of way. You know, it's like, you don't really know. It's not necessarily bad. They're not necessarily doing anything wrong, but I feel some kind of way about this. Like, something in my heart like knows this isn't what it's supposed to be, you know? So I'm glad you brought up Larry Fitzgerald, because that's a really good example of someone who was a superstar as a freshman. And you're a superstar at Pittsburgh as a freshman, next year you're going to be playing for Texas. You're going to be playing for Alabama. And like, that's not what we want college football to be. And also, I'm glad you brought up the controlled variable, because that's the biggest issue I have with college football right now. In the 2018 class, that was the first one where we had the early signing period. And then 2020, we have now the one-time transfer rule is in play. 2021, now the players can make money. Like, these are three huge things that have changed the sport in like 3 years, and we don't really know which one is the one that is setting it in a course that we're not really feeling comfortable with, you know? So it's like, there was no controlled variable. We've had all these huge changes. And now it's like the federal government stepping in. It's like, you already don't trust what the federal government is going to do. And now the NCAA saying, oh, yeah, we're going to look at these collectives. It's like, well, yeah, we do want something to be done with these collectives. But, like, we've already given up that you guys are going to do the right thing, that you guys are going to figure this out. So I don't even know what's going to come of this. Like, I know the Ohio State athletic director said something about, like, kind of alluded to the Power 5 schools. Like, the schools should be responsible for, like, kind of disconnected from the NIL stuff, and, like, I don't know, like, have like a revenue sharing type deal. Like, I could be butchering what he said, but basically, like, the NCAA can't be in charge of the policing.
Well, your broader point is where we're at, where it's like, it's going to be a conference by conference thing. You're seeing the Pac-12 meet this week, and they're talking about their own guardrails. Like, that's what's going to happen, I think, is each conference is going to have their own rules, which is like, well, great, Pac-12, because guess what? You can put all these rules on. Guess who's not putting any guardrails on? The SEC. Greg Sankey's not doing any of that. He's not hamstringing Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and company. That's not happening. You want to see... Yeah.
Even that, like, that's progress, but, like, all these Power 5, that's why these Power 5 schools need to kind of be doing their own thing, you know? It's like in their own league, whatever you want to call it, because I just don't like the idea of the Big 12 having different rules than the SEC, than the Pac-12. Like, oh, well, the Pac-12, they're offering 8% revenue sharing for the players, and the SEC is offering 5% revenue share. It's like, this isn't what we want the sport to be. It's like, we want at least the schools at the top to all be competing on the same level. It's like, there's never fairness in sports. You know, there's these brands that are in, you know, maybe bigger markets, or they're in, you know, have more tradition, have a bigger fan base, whatever the case may be. So there's never going to be just equality, period. But you can do the best you can to have everyone playing by the same rules. Like, there's got to be something capped with this. I feel like when we first heard of, like, the Texas, like, the pancake charity or whatever it is for, like, Texas offensive linemen, and then just see what A&M has done. Like, we don't really know what exactly A&M has done, but we just know we've never seen A&M recruit like this before, right? It's like, they've gotten good classes, but this level of recruiting, it makes us feel some kind of way, right?
With Kim Dichie and everything, where you're like, okay, this is like, you're Ole Miss and you can have these blip years, but, like, number one, number one Ole Miss.
You have Kim Deechie's brother already on your roster. Mm-hmm. Maybe Kim Deechie will want to go there too. Not all these other 5 stars.
Yeah.
Like, you got to be doing something. So, and that's not to like, you don't want to like rain on Ole Miss's parade, on Texas A&M's parade for like, are you just mad because we're a new kid on the block? Like, if Alabama and Ohio State were doing this, you don't really, bat an eye to it. So I don't know. It's a tough conversation to have. I'm all for the players, being compensated in some way, but I think we can all agree like this isn't where we wanted to be. We didn't want to hear that so and so is offering $5 million to get him to transfer to away from his school. Like, that's not what we want this sport to be. Like, and I don't know how you balance it, to be honest. Like, once you open the floodgates,
because it's not the schools paying him. So that's the problem. This is why you cannot legislate this out of the game right now, is that there's nothing you can do right now to stop a collective in Southern California to lure some other player that they can afford to lure. Like, there's nothing you can do when Miami throws the bag at that Miami basketball player who's like, I'll leave. It's like, all right, well, here we go. We'll step up to the plate and you can stay. Like, there's nothing you can't cap, because it's not how it works in any other business. It's not how it works in professional life whatsoever. You can't just cap our earnings and cap what a private business is willing to pay me to work or do this particular job. You're worth what anybody's willing to pay you. And if a collective in even just like Eastern Michigan, when Charlie Batch was out here trying to get a couple mil to bring in Caleb Williams to Eastern Michigan, it's like, if the money's there and a company wants to throw their money around like that, they're going to do that. The hope, I guess, if you're a have-not school right now, is that you're going to see a lot of schools throw a lot of money around early, and then those millionaires are like, ooh, we're not getting a lot of return on this revenue that we're throwing out. Like, they're not producing what we think they are, because they're throwing a lot of money at unknowns. Like, Spencer Rattler was a huge unknown that's getting a lot of money. Caleb Williams, a huge unknown to this point. Nico, we don't know if it's Nico, if he's that guy. We don't know. Like, we'll never know that story in the unnamed player. But
when these guys just have so much money to give the program anyway,
right.
It's like, well, I was going to give $10 million to the university this year anyway. Why not give 2 to this prospect and 2 to this prospect and 2 to this prospect? It's like, one of the first things I thought of, just because Auburn, their biggest booster is the Yellowwood guy. He's kind of a public figure. It's like, that was one of the first things I thought of, was like, what's preventing him from just having the entire team in a photo shoot? And then it's like, they get paid $50,000 a year for marketing. They're on the payroll. Like, I don't think anything is preventing them from doing that, from having a Yellowwood player of the game every game and paying $100,000 for whoever has a pick 6 or something. Like, I don't really know. I think that is by definition against the rules, but there's just so many ways around the rules that these smart people, wealthy people, are going to be able to come up with. Like, it's a slippery slope.
What we might have to do? Something I was thinking about today, and I don't know, it seems unlikely that this could happen, but I'm inching more towards bringing back the sit out a year no matter what if you transfer now. So I think if players are getting paid, you can sit. It's kind of like when coaches get the buyout and they're like, oh, well, you can take the money, but you can't coach somewhere else. Like, you can still get our money for a little bit, but if you take another head coaching job, the buyout changes. Like that, this would not be, I don't know how popular this would be, but like, if kids have signed the NIL deal or that has happened, now that is, the money is just so outrageous and all over the place that, like, maybe the way to prevent this Jordan Addison situation from happening, because he's close to the pros, is like, okay, you can throw money at him, and if he leaves, he has to sit out a year. Like, that's the deal. It's like he has to sit out. And I think that's one way of curtailing what's happening here, where how badly do you really want to transfer? Like, how badly do you want this to be a thing? Because if you don't, and part of it too, I think things were weird with the extra COVID year. That messed up a lot of stuff. It messed up a lot of rosters because all these guys got an extra year of eligibility. And until we get that extra year of eligibility completely out of the system, it's going to be hard to get this 100% right. But I don't know. I think part of me really does believe that, like, okay, this is good. NIL is good. but the transfer stuff is not. Like, the transfer stuff worries me significantly more about the health of this sport than NIL, because like you've said, and we've talked about in this very podcast, is that this players have been getting paid forever. The haves have had more money and better facilities and have Bama, Georgia, Tennessee, whoever, Texas, USC, they're always going to have an advantage. And like you said with the Southeast last week, we were like, in the recruiting hotbed that they're in, and with just the amount of boosters and the amount of care that people have in our area, they're going to dominate the sport forever. Like, that's just how this sport has always been. It's how it's always going to be. There is a reason that it's significantly harder for Michigan to be a national power year over year now. There is a reason that Nebraska is never getting back to what they were in the 90s. That it's never happening again, because it's just the players are not there. So they're having to pull from these other areas where it's just, not to get into that rabbit hole, but like, that is just the way it is. So when you look at all of that, I think it's the transfer stuff. I think that's how we clean up a lot of this. It's like, NIL is good. You're just screw it. Like, you're not going to be able to fix NIL. Like, you're not going to be able to fix boosters getting involved. You're not going to be able to stop the private market from doing what the private market's going to do. Like, good luck. Go after these businesses or these corporations, whoever. Guess what? They have great lawyers. And do you know what the Supreme Court or the NCAA has no interest in doing? Is going after these millionaires in Tennessee or Bama or wherever. Like, they're not doing that. They're not suing.
Their record's
just like,
not too hot going to court, the NCAA.
Yeah, it's not happening. They're not doing it.
I don't hate your idea of getting rid of the sitting out for a transfer. It's like you still have the grad transfer that you can do without sitting out, but I don't hate that idea. But one thing that I wonder, like, we know these scholarships are not guaranteed. They're 1 year scholarships that essentially get renewed every year. I wonder if the NIL is like, have deferred money kind of thing. Like, we're going to sign you. Like, if this is the way that we actually sign players to contracts, is through these NIL agreements. And, maybe you have more, maybe you're willing to break the agreement because you can go to another school and get a bigger NIL contract or something. But I wonder if maybe even that's a way to, like, we'll pay you, $50,000 year one, but if you stay for year two, it's $100,000. If you stay to year three, it's $500,000. Like, if that's a way to get some of these guys to not transfer. But under the current circumstances we have, like, with the wild west it's become, I don't hate decentivizing transferring a little bit, like just making just sitting out for 1 year. Like, you have 5 years really to play college football. Like, I don't hate that idea.
Well, it also looks like, I think that's what's changing first, is coaches are burnout. Like, did you listen to what I sent you with the Eye on Basketball podcast with Norlander and Parrish?
Did this week? I'm sorry, I never did.
No, it's okay. So the first 7 minutes, Norlander was talking about his time talking to a bunch of college basketball coaches and just how burnout. Like, I think he mentioned on the pod that he talked to Gary Musselman, the Arkansas head coach, and that during the tournament.
Eric Musselman?
Eric Musselman. What did I say?
I think Gary.
Oh,
is
yeah,
that
Gary
right?
Musselman.
Eric? I think
is
that's
there
right.
Gary Musselman? I don't know. Yeah, Eric Musselman. Excuse me. But he told, I'm pretty sure it was Eric Musselman who told Matt that, like, hey, I was on the phone, or I was having to talk. I spent more time with the transfer portal in the tournament than I did coaching and, like, focusing on the tournament games. Like, when we're at that point where it's like, you're having to worry about talking to kids in the portal while your team is literally trying to win a national championship, and you're advancing and you're spending more time worrying about who's in the portal and who's not, while actual games are happening during the season in the tournament, what are we doing? Like, at that point, there's already a tipping point. Like, you talk to any college coach, like, that's the worst part of it. And, like, no one's going to shed a tear because they are well compensated. It's a great gig, whatever. The other thing to be true is that you're going to have a lot more burnout. You're going to have a lot more Matt Lukes. You're going to have a lot more people that are like, screw this, man. Like, the money's great, but I'm not dealing with the portal every day. I'm not dealing with this much turnover and trying to recruit and talk to transfers and talk to people every day. Like, I just can't. It's not realistic. You can't do it. So I wonder, when I was listening to that, I'm like, man, I think that gets changed first, because I think there is enough pull between all the coaches and they're all unanimous in this. And I think players could understand this too, where it's like, man, you're getting your money and all that, but like, this is not working. Like, it not having a time period of when you can enter the portal and when you can't was the dumbest thing that they did, where it was just like no rules. You can enter the portal whenever, other than the academic year on May 1st. But like, what we've seen is like, and coaches are okay with this, that they think the fair way to do it, and I think this is fair for players, that you read in the ESPN piece with Heather Dinich, is that after the last game of the season, I think, the portal opens, and then after spring practice. Like, that's it. Like, so that makes sense, where it's like players after spring practice, you know where you stand, and then after the season, you can revisit the portal. So you have those 2 windows during that time, where it's like, you could not do this during the season, and we still have a dead period in the off season. Like that, it has to be a lot of months blocked off here for the portal.
No, and that's definitely a good idea. It's just funny that college football, it has this huge albatross that it's like, that's just preventing so much progress from happening that no one really wants to talk about. And it's the bowl games. It's like you have a month after, because you talk about if your team didn't make the conference championship, your last game is November 27th, and maybe you had a really good season, and your bowl game is on January 2nd. Like, that's a ridiculous amount of time to wait to play one game, especially if you don't even know if you want to be at this school next year. Like, you're not going to play in that game, most likely. Like, you're going to decide, especially with the early signing period and everything, like being in the middle of that huge break, it makes absolutely no sense that teams are prepping for bowl games and national championships, and then there's the biggest recruiting week of the entire season, just right smack dab in the middle of it. So it's just funny because I feel like the bowl games could help get rid of like so many of these problems. Like, if you just had 2 weeks of bowl games, like 2 Saturdays, like right after the conference championships in, and then those teams are done, like, the sport would just make way more sense. But that's just not how we do it in college football. Like, it's just,
bowls have to go. Like, I'm there. Bowls have to go.
The TV networks just love the bowl games because they get people watching their networks at random times on December 22nd, and December 23rd. Like, that's why the bowl games will never leave. But it's just like the biggest just like roadblock that's just in the way of so many things that college football like really like kind of needs to do to make the sport progress. Because, like, I don't know, I know Josh Pate mentioned like revenue sharing in the bowl games. Like, if you play, if you're on the active roster for the bowl game, then you can, and your team wins, then you make us X amount. If you're sitting out the bowl game, you don't get to make any of the money, you know? So it, like, to do something to these bowl games, because the bowl games are such a big deal and no one cares about them anymore. Yeah. It's like Ole Miss Baylor, like, that should have been like an awesome bowl game. Like, 2 teams that, like, you know, really, and that's, who's the other one I'm thinking of? Ohio State, Utah, like in the Rose Bowl. Granted, that wasn't a really exciting game, but Ohio State's marquee players
a bunch of dudes.
Are sitting out the Rose Bowl. Like, this is the Rose Bowl. Like, so that just seems like the biggest red flag. The granddaddy of them all, as they say. Like, that's the biggest red flag, that, like, there's these huge matchups. Oklahoma and Florida playing last year. Like, those teams never play each other. Last time they played was for a national championship. 2 national brands. And, like, you couldn't have cared less. That game couldn't have reflected the 2 teams any less than it did. It's just, we got to do something about the bowl games. My personal, what I want to do right at this point, like, I didn't come up with a suggestion. I've just heard all kinds of ideas. Is just play the bowl games to open the next season. Like, that would make it kind of how you have to qualify for Champions League in European soccer, like the year prior. Like, if you know that the Sugar Bowl is going to be Baylor Ole Miss first game of next season, like, there's something exciting about that. The players are going to care. Like, right now, the players don't care about these bowl games, and you can't make them care if they don't want to care about them.
Well, you can't bring about a playoff and then be like, also care about this exhibition game that doesn't count towards anything when everything is about the playoff. You can't have both. And at this point, we're too far down the other way, where it's like we're just pretending that this thing still matters because it mattered for decades. But it's like, it's over. Like, you saw, I forgot, was it a NCAA president or somebody, or it was some school's president who said, like, the CFP should take control of college football from the NCAA, where, like, the college football playoff is what runs this like FBS football is like, that's what they do. It's like, this is just the people that run the CFP run college football. And I'm actually okay with that because that would be more continuity. There would probably be leadership in that scenario. There would be an understanding of how this all works. I think that would
get a pretty diverse group of former players, former coaches, like maybe people who aren't players or coaches. They do seem to get a pretty good group, and it's a group that turns over every year too.
Yeah,
or every couple years maybe.
And they make like that is something you could do, and there would actually be a governing body for this mess. Like there would be something like, I'm actually okay with all of that.
But what do we do without the Rose Bowl parade, Chase?
I know.
That is the question. The Rose Bowl parade is holding the entire sport hostage.
I love bowl season. I grew up on it. I grew up just loving bowl season, filling out my bowl predictions with the family and everything. But like, it's so silly. Like they treat it like a tryout for a lot of teams, where like a lot of teams use bowl games now as like, who can we play next year? Who should we continue? Like we're going to throw guys out there to see like how they perform in this exhibition, and guys that haven't played all year. And we're going to see if they're a part of our long-term plans. Like
you might as well, or to keep someone happy. Like he's thinking about transferring. We need to get him some playing time, kind of show him how we'll use him in the future. Yeah, it absolutely is used for that. And it's like, that shouldn't be what we're talking about when two teams went 11-2 this season and they never play each other, and now we finally have
the Pro Bowl.
Yeah, and it's just like, exactly. They might not be tackling in bowl games here in a few years.
And it's so funny too, because it's like it's so hard. Like the idea that sitting out, and I understand it's more complicated, but if there's NIL money now and there's more money, maybe that changes. Maybe we change our tune because the opt-outs go down if so many kids are getting paid that they do play in the bowl games now. If they are getting paid, I don't know. Like it's.
But the NIL money is rarely going to be better than the NFL money, though.
True.
So you got one more game in your entire career. It makes sense that guys like, this game doesn't mean anything. I would rather be healthy, have both my ACLs, and get ready for the draft in April.
Yeah. UGA, speaking of the draft in April, so UGA set a record for drafted players. Matt Green, I need Georgia fans to calm it down, because I saw my timeline. I kid you not. The amount of Georgia fans who were so upset about the Falcons passing on Nakobe Dean multiple times, and this guy was right here.
Outrageous.
Yeah, how do you not take Channing Tindall? How do you not take Lewis Snead? How do you not take Jordan Davis? How do you not take insert player here? And it's like, okay, two things here. It's not a bad decision to not take a Georgia player. There's this idea that like, if you draft more Georgia players, there's going to be more butts and seats in Mercedes-Benz. That's not a good way of doing business. You don't just draft because you're like, our fan base will be happy if we take this player over. And you're like, it's a 5-star. Obviously, it's a good player. He's coming from Georgia, national champions, all-time great defense. Great. But the idea that we should, like the Terry Fontenot and the Falcons should be thinking in the back of their mind, like, we got to make sure we get at least one of these Georgia defenders in the first 3 rounds, even if we don't like them as much as this other guy who we think will be a better player. But it's just like, we got to appease those Georgia fans. It's so silly. And it's also like someone said like majority of Georgia or Falcons fans are Georgia fans. Not true. That is simply not true. The NFL is a global sport now, and the amount of fans from all over the world and all over this country and everything else.
There's a strong overlap, though.
I don't think it's strong. I really don't. I think a lot of Georgia fans don't watch the NFL like that. I think there's a lot of college football fans that don't do both. Like it would surprise you how many. Like look at you right here. You're a good example of this.
I care more about Georgia players in the NFL than I do one specific NFL team.
Exactly.
But the one thing, and I don't hate on, I didn't like the Drake London pick. Like, he could be a really good receiver, but like, and you saw the receivers fly off the board after him.